So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I think we'll get started shortly. In the meantime, I encourage you to introduce yourselves on the chat. And please note that when you do send a message, please select send to everyone when you send a message. We'll just wait a few moments for others to join. Thanks. So welcome to everyone. I think maybe we will get started soon. And welcome to the SDG 6 Progress Webinar on Targets 6A and 6B. My name is Marina Takane. I work in the Water, Sanitation, Hygiene, and Health Unit at WHO on the GLAAS initiative. And I'm the responsible officer for monitoring and reporting on these two targets. Really happy and excited to be here with you today. We have some exciting updates for you, as well as useful information. And we also want to provide an opportunity for discussion and engagement. So again, I encourage you to introduce yourselves on the chat. And note again that you should select send to everyone when you send a message. But before we get started and into the content of this webinar, let me show you a video message from Kellyanne Naylor, the UN Water Vice Chair. So one moment.
Dear colleagues and friends of water, thank you very much for joining this webinar today to discuss progress towards Sustainable Development Goal 6. This webinar is part of a series of webinars taking place this month, each focusing on global progress towards a specific SDG 6 indicator and target. Before we get into the details, I wanted to share a few important messages about overall progress towards SDG 6 and how the UN is working together to report on our progress. We are now 6 years into the SDGs. And for the first time, we have water and sanitation data from almost all the countries in the world. This country data were compiled last year by the UN custodian agencies who joined forces under the UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative for SDG 6, or as we fondly call it, IMI SDG 6. The unprecedented level of reporting is a major accomplishment for us as a global community, but even more so for all the country focal points who are joining us in this webinar. On behalf of UN Water, I would like to thank all of you for your extra hard efforts in monitoring SDG 6 in your country this year, especially in the difficult times we've been all living through. When we look at this data, they sadly confirm the tendency that we first saw in 2018, that we are off track to achieve sustainable water and sanitation for all by 2030. Taking a look at some of the hard facts about SDG 6, we see that billions of people worldwide still live without safe water and sanitation and basic hygiene services. Nearly 10% of the world's population still live in areas with extreme water stress. We know that wastewater is being released untreated into the environment. And 1 in 5 of the world's river basins are changing rapidly, which is exacerbated by changes in climate. We see that sustainable management of water resources remains out of reach for many countries. The data show that in order to meet our goals and targets, we are going to need to accelerate progress, and in some areas up to 4 times faster to be able to meet SDG 6 within the next 9 years. More than anything, we're going to need politicians and policymakers at all levels to be able to set bolder priorities and quickly. But the good news is that we already have a lot of sustainable solutions in place. Last year, UN Water launched the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework with the full backing of the UN family to mobilize action across government, civil society, and the private sector across the UN to be able to better align our efforts, optimize financing, and enhance capacity and governance. From our work with countries and from their data, we've learned a lot about opportunities for accelerating progress. We've learned about the importance of scaling up capacity building, coordinated action, mobilizing political will. And of course, we've learned how data and information can be used to better guide policy and decision makers in their work. Because despite these heroic monitoring efforts of the last year, we still see large data gaps. Our ambition and hope with this data and with our SDG 6 reports are to further encourage and support national and subnational data collection and ultimately help policy and decision makers to take informed action. This is what IMI SDG 6 will be focusing on as we go forward, and we call on the entire water community from global to local efforts to join us in taking this forward. I wish you a very fruitful and lively webinar today, and very warmly welcome you to join the other indicator webinars that we're organizing this month. Thank you for your attention and for all of your continued efforts to drive progress towards our common goal to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kellyanne, for that encouraging message. Let me see. So, welcome again to those of you who have just joined. This is the SDG 6 progress webinar for targets 6A and 6B. I encourage you again to introduce yourselves on the chat, making sure again to select everyone when you send a message on the chat. So here's a bit of an overview of what we have planned for the session today. And just to note that we're in a somewhat different position from some of the other SDG indicators and the other webinars that have been taking place this week, because we have not published a report this year, although we do have one planned for next year. So rather than a report launch, this webinar will be more of a progress update on these targets and what's being planned for the upcoming data collection. So just to give an overview, I'll be giving a very brief introduction and in particular making the link between the SDG 6 means of implementation targets 6A and 6B and GLAAS. We'll be giving a bit of a background on UN Water GLAAS, followed by an update on the SDG 6 means of implementation targets. We'll be giving some information about the upcoming GLAAS data collection. And then I hope we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and answers at the end. So in terms of monitoring the SDG 6 means of implementation, the means of implementation refer to those enabling factors such as financial resources, human capacity, governance, these various elements which allow countries to make progress towards the outcome targets and the overall goal. And the UN Water GLAAS Initiative, the Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water, has been monitoring the enabling environment for water sanitation and hygiene since 2008, including on national targets, provisions for vulnerable populations, and on finance. All these elements that contribute to countries making progress towards SDG 6. So the GLAAS country survey contributes to monitoring of targets 6A and 6B, and it very much complements other SDG 6 monitoring initiatives. Just a note as well that we also have an in-depth study through the WASH accounts on the finance aspects of the means of implementation using the Trackbin methodology, which contributes to the monitoring of 6A. Of course, 6A focuses on external aid, but the WASH accounts aims to provide a much more comprehensive picture, looking at government funding and user contributions in addition to external aid to really provide a full picture of water sanitation and hygiene finance. So hopefully this helps to clarify the very strong link between GLAAS and the SDG 6 means of implementation. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Fiona to give us a bit of a background on UN Water GLAAS. Fiona?
Thank you very much, Marina, and a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today. And thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. And it's a real pleasure for us to be able to present the SDG 6 means of implementation indicators and targets and provide you with a little bit of background of the context. Next, please, Marina. So what is GLAAS? We've several times mentioned the GLAAS acronym, and the GLAAS acronym means UN Water, Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water. Some of the participants I can see are already familiar with this, and I recognize several names. And so it's a real pleasure for me to share where we are today, where we're heading, but also to introduce to the new participants that may not be as familiar as others. The GLAAS initiative is implemented by WHO on behalf of UN Water. And it's basically a global update on WASH systems, and it includes policy frameworks, governance, institutional arrangements, monitoring systems, regulation, human resources, and finance. And it's really meant to be a global WASH, global monitoring mechanism. Next slide, please. Now, this diagram is really to show you some of the areas of work, and Marina's already mentioned some of them, but just to go over it, there's the GLAAS data collection, which we'll be going into a little bit further, which contributes, this data contributes towards reporting to SDG 6 means of implementation for 6A and 6B. And every 2 to 3 years, we produce a report. We go through data collection, and we're really pleased that we've just launched the new data collection worldwide. And we're also very pleased to share with you the new data portal that is being launched in the next few days. And of course, the other area of work is the reporting towards SDG 6 monitoring and the means of implementation. Then the other area that Marina was just mentioning is about the WASH accounts, which uses a methodology called TrackFin. Now, the WASH accounts is really based and built on health accounts for those of you coming from the health sector. Now, we have different areas where we do some more deep dives, like the PMAT, Policy Monitoring Assessment Tool. And it's really about going further into the policy and strategy plan and frameworks. And lastly, it's all there's a lot of aspects around collaboration and partnerships. And by all means, these are just a few of them, but we work very closely with our colleagues at UNICEF, at Sanitation and Water for All, SWA, WaterAid, AMCAL in the African region, IRC, and by all means, this is not an exhaustive list. Next slide, please. So just taking you a little bit further into the GLAAS data collection and the reports and what the purpose and objectives of this work is. It's basically to monitor the inputs required to extend and sustain WASH systems and services to all, and especially go for the unserved and disadvantaged groups. But also it's really meant to try and support country-led processes, provide information on the inputs and processes going into the WASH systems that bring together the many institutions and actors that are involved in WASH. I think we all know that the WASH sector involves a very big number of actors working in different ministries with different roles, and the idea being is to bring together these different actors. And one of the ideas is also to identify the drivers, the successes, but also the gaps and bottlenecks of the progress towards reaching outcomes, and to highlight knowledge gaps and assess what are the strengths and some of the challenges across countries to be able to then address these. And to analyze and highlight data from country and external support agency in reports, and we produce a number of highlights, whether it's country highlights, but there's also regional highlights as well as the GLAAS report, but also providing all this information in the GLAAS data portal that will be launched in the next couple of days, and we'll be really pleased to share once the data portal goes live. Next slide, please, Marina. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, information, and as I said just earlier on, we're just in the process of launching the new GLAAS 2021-2022 data collection, which is going to be ongoing from now present until the requested deadline, which is the 1st of April 22. And all the information will be collected and then analysed and presented in the UN Water GLAAS report towards the end of next year. So as Marina mentioned, we have not just produced an indicator report, but we will be producing a report next year. As you can see, this is on the left-hand side of the slide, this is the global report that was produced and launched in Stockholm World Water Week back in 2019. And it featured 115 countries from around the world and 29 external support agencies. And on the right-hand side, you can see the map that shows the coverage in green of the countries that participated in the last GLAAS survey. In blue, what you can see is the external support agencies that participated in a data collection that really aimed to look at external support agencies, priorities, targets, and where the money is actually going. And is that actually bridging the gap of the need of countries? Next slide, please. Just want to mention a couple of collaborations that we have, and in this particular case with Africa, with AMCAL, the African Ministers' Council on Water. And we collaborate very closely on the data for the Africa water sector and sanitation monitoring and reporting, what we call the WASMO. And these indicators are aligned with GLAAS and the WASH accounts, as well as the AMCAL's NGOR monitoring. And the GLAAS 2021 country survey contributes to and aligns with the monitoring of the NGOR commitment, for those of you that are familiar with this regional monitoring in the African region, reducing the reporting burden on countries. And one point I'd like to mention is that AMCAL focal points at country level are really welcome and encouraged to contribute to the GLAAS process at national level. Next slide, please. Another newer initiative that is happening is the GLAAS data collection also contributes towards the Global Water Partnership, GWP, Southern Africa's initiative on the water investment scorecard. And the GLAAS data will be used as a data source to inform this newly developed scorecard. And the overall objective of this scorecard is to enhance accountability for results in mobilization of water investments in Africa and sustain political and leadership commitment at the heads of state level for gender transformative and climate resilience and sanitation investments in the achievement of SDG 6. I see we have a hand up. Maybe we can keep the questions. So keep your hands up for any questions, and we'll have a moment to then answer questions. Next slide, please, Marina. So we also have collaborations, of course, in the other regions. And just to name a few, in Latin America, GLAAS findings are presented as evidence for the Latino SAN, the sanitation conferences. In South Asia, GLAAS findings have been used as part of the SACO-SANs, also the big sanitation regional conferences in South Asia, as well as Europe, for example. GLAAS synergy with the protocol on water and health and supports setting baselines and identifying national targets. Next slide, please. Now, another very important collaboration is with SWA, Sanitation and Water for All. And GLAAS is really meant to be the evidence arm of SWA and provides data for the SWA results framework and helps informs the working groups, including the Systems and Finance Working Group. And participating in GLAAS helps with the preparation work for the SWA high-level meetings, whether it's the sector meetings or the finance ministers meetings that happen on a regular basis. Next slide, please. Now, some countries will ask, well, what's the benefit of taking part and participating in the GLAAS initiative and data collection? Well, it provides a useful situation analysis of the WASH sector. As I mentioned earlier on, it identifies information gaps and helps decision makers define priorities and devise plans, really on the inputs and processes that the WASH systems in place, and really brings different stakeholders together. And lastly, and more importantly, and this is the objective of this morning's webinar, today's webinar, is to contribute to SDG 6 monitoring, as well as regional monitoring initiatives. And with that, I'd like to pass over to Marina. And Marina, do we want to, there is one hand up. Should we allow for one question?
Sure, why don't we go ahead and take one question.
So I think we've got Daval Pandya. If you'd like to ask your question, keep it short, bearing in mind that we have limited time. And we will unmute you. At least we're trying. Allowed to talk. Here we go. Daval.
Oh, yes. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Thank you for raising your hand. Please let us know your question.
As seen this GLAAS presentation, that was very good. But data which is shown there is I just wanted to clear about the rainfall and its management in this GLAAS region. That how they are managing the rain, because rain is the real water we can conserve and supply throughout the year. So how you guys are handling in GLAAS this rainfall of the that region?
Thank you very much, Daval, for your question. Well, in fact, the GLAAS survey data collection tool assesses water and sanitation and hygiene, and not necessarily water resources. However, we have colleagues in the UN Environment that deal with that type of data collection. Our scope is limited to WASH, so water, sanitation and hygiene. And except for, and Marina will be talking about this, we do expand beyond for IWRM, Integrated Monitoring Resource Management, for the purposes of the SDG 6 means of implementation. Thank you for your question. And we look forward, and I hope that answers your question. Please indicate in the chat if you've got further comments on this. Thank you very much. And now I suggest to pass over to Marina to take us through SDG 6 and means of implementation. Thank you, Marina, over to you.
Thanks, Fiona. And as Fiona said, we very much welcome questions. And I think we will also pause for a short question and answer session after this presentation as well. So I will be giving a quick overview and update of the SDG 6 means of implementation target 6A and 6B. I think we've all seen this diagram before. This gives an overview of the monitoring of the SDG 6 global indicators and targets. So we have UN Water coordinating the monitoring of the targets and indicators under SDG 6. There are 6 outcome targets, 6.1 to 6.6 under SDG 6, and the 2 means of implementation targets, 6A and 6B, on cooperation and on participation. We have various agencies involved in and contributing to the monitoring of these targets and indicators, including GLAAS for 6A and 6B, the WHO UNICEF Joint Monitoring Program, or JMP, for 6.1 and 6.2, and the Integrated Monitoring Initiative, or IMI, with other UN agencies. And just to note that of the 11 indicators for monitoring SDG 6, there are actually 5 indicators monitored by WHO in collaboration with co-custodians. So 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3.1, as well as the means of implementation 6A and 6B. So GLAAS contributes to the monitoring for 6A and 6B. Specifically on target 6A, the target itself is by 2030 to expand international cooperation and capacity building support to developing countries in water and sanitation related activities and programs, including water harvesting, desalination, water efficiency, wastewater treatment, recycling, and reuse technologies. The indicator used to monitor this target is the amount of water and sanitation related official development assistance that is part of a government coordinated spending plan. So in terms of data sources for monitoring of this target and indicator, we do have a question in the GLAAS country survey, question D9, where we're looking at how external funding is channeled. The bulk of the data used to monitor this indicator actually comes from OECD. They have a large database on official development assistance through the creditor reporting system, which is used to report on this indicator. On target 6B, on community and user participation, the target itself is to support and strengthen the participation of local communities in improving water and sanitation management. The indicator for monitoring this target is the percentage of local administrative units with established and operational policies and procedures for participation of local communities in water and sanitation management. For this target, the GLAAS country survey is the main data source for monitoring the target and the indicator. There is a question in the survey dedicated to this purpose, question A11. For the purpose of monitoring 6B, we've actually expanded the scope of this question beyond what's strictly WASH to include questions on integrated water resource management. We have been progressively refining and improving this question on 6B community and user participation across multiple GLAAS cycles. And in particular for the upcoming cycle, we've revised the question to be able to capture the percentage of population with access to opportunities for participation. Within the GLAAS initiative, we've also conducted a 6B in-depth study on refining the monitoring of this target and basically laying out a plan going forward for improving and refining the monitoring methodology. We also work quite closely with UNEP on and their data on community and user participation that they collect through their IWRM SDG 6.a.1 survey. So we often do complementary data analyses using our GLAAS and IWRM data. We also collaborate closely with OECD on this target, specifically with the Water Governance Initiative and complementary data that they collect through their water governance indicators. In terms of update, in terms of results, on 6A, most recently what we found is that over the 5-year period from 2015 to 2019, ODA disbursements have shown very little change at around $8.8 billion US. Over the same time period, ODA commitments did rise 9%. However, this stagnation or very little change in the amount of disbursements is quite concerning, in particular in light of the finding from the last GLAAS report showing a funding gap of 61% between what countries need to achieve their national WASH targets and what is available to them in terms of funding. So a very large funding gap, and it seems for at least in the past few years, there has not been much increase in donor disbursements to the water sector. And of course, we have been saying that increasing donor contributions to the water sector is still very crucial to make progress towards Goal 6, in addition to greater and more efficient investments from national governments. This is a map showing the distribution of ODA in 2019. So the distribution by SDG region. And what we see from this map that is shown is that in 2019, Sub-Saharan Africa received the largest share of ODA disbursements for the water sector at 34%. And in fact, disbursements to the region increased from 2.8 billion in 2015 to 3.1 billion in 2019. Including an increase of 58% in aid to large water and sanitation systems. One interesting result that we found was that if we focus on aid flows for the water sector in least developed countries, which is what the graph is showing here, What we see is that concessional lending in the water sector has increased by 52% from 2015 to 2019. This is the yellow line shown here. While ODA grants have not shown much increase at all over the same time period. So in fact, we see a fairly strong and steady increase in loans, whereas the grants seem to be stagnating, which may be of concern given that least developed countries are in some ways where the needs are greatest, and perhaps with a more fragile capacity to repay loans. So maybe an interesting result for further thought. On target 6B, on local participation. So just to explain a little bit, through the GLAAS survey, we collect data on community participation on 6 subsectors. We look at rural and urban drinking water, rural and urban sanitation, hygiene, and water resources planning and management. So what this map is showing is the number of subsectors that have clearly defined procedures for community participation. And what we see from the map here is that we see a lot of blue. So a lot of countries saying that we have clearly defined procedures for 5 or 6 of the subsectors that we asked about in the survey. So 2/3 of the 109 reporting countries said that they had participation procedures that are defined in laws or policies in all 6 water and sanitation subsectors. So including in Africa, Central and South America, in Europe, Middle East, and in Asia. However, when we look at levels of participation, we found that only 14 countries reported having high levels of participation by communities in water and sanitation decision-making. So for rural drinking water and sanitation and water resources management, most countries reported medium levels of user and community participation, which implies that communities are occasionally or regularly consulted, but not to the extent of collaboration or representation in decision-making processes. And so I think what's interesting is that the implementation of participation procedures under SDG 6 seems to be limited by a lack of financial and human resources. So approximately 6 in 10 countries reported that human and financial resources were less than half of what is needed to support community participation. And we found that the situation was particularly critical in urban areas where over 3/4 of countries reported insufficient financial resources to support participation. So I'm going to pause here for another round of questions, if there are any.
So Marina, we have an exciting question in the chat, and I'll read you out the question. Is it possible of developing a new SDG indicator on water and sanitation into 6A? That's a challenging question coming from one of our colleagues, and I'm probably not going to pronounce your name right, but from Do and Gokpish.
Great, thank you so much for your question. That's a really interesting question. I think it would be quite challenging to introduce a new indicator officially under SDG target 6A. I do think that from within the GLAAS team and within the Integrated Monitoring Initiative, we've been trying to take a fairly broad approach to monitoring of these targets. So even for indicators that have not been officially accepted as indicators under an SDG target, we've been trying to monitor the targets in such a way that it's sort of most useful to countries in order to provide the information that would be most useful for countries and partners to be able to use this information to support progress on SDG 6. I think if we were to try to have an official indicator accepted under SDG 6A, it would be a very long and complicated process. I would not say it's impossible, but I think it would be very challenging.
So Marina, thank you for that. And I hope that answers our colleague from Vietnam's question. We have another question from Lesha. Do you use disaggregated data, participation level and receiving of money?
So thank you, Lesha, for that question. In terms of disaggregation of the data in this question, I believe we only disaggregate by subsector. And I don't think we have disaggregated further. I would need to check the exact survey question, but I don't think we have gone beyond disaggregating by subsector on this. Perhaps, yes, I think that's right.
Super. And Lesha is writing back, first of all, asking if the presentation will be available. And I will have to refer to our colleagues at UN Water, but I'm pretty sure that the presentations would be available on the UN Water website. And maybe I'll let Sarah from UN Water and we'll confirm that in the chat. But we would be happy to share the presentations. Lisha's also asking, can we check that and see how we can do that regarding the disaggregation of data? And I think that's certainly something we can look into. So Lisha, thank you very much for the questions. That's wonderful. Unless there's any other questions, which I don't see. Oh, Sarah, thank you very much. Sarah from UN Water has shared in the chat that all materials will be shared on the following page. So please take note of that website that has just been shared in the chat, where all the information from this week's webinars on SDG 6 will be available. Thank you for confirming that, Sarah. Wonderful. Great. I don't see any other hands and no.
Fiona?
Oh yes, there's one. Yes.
There are a couple of questions under question and answer. One is in French. Je voulais savoir à quand le lancement de la nouvelle enquête GLAAS pour la région Afrique.
Yes, so one question actually, and I'll translate that, is when is the GLAAS survey available, particularly for the African region? And I've actually responded in the chat to that question, just to let you all know, and I'll be speaking about this in the next few slides. The GLAAS data collection has been launched, and the package, which has the guidance document, the actual survey, as well as information modules in English, as well as in French, are available and ready to go. Spanish has also been finalized. We are working on finalizing the Russian, which should be available very shortly. And I see our colleague from the WHO Regional Office for Europe is also on this webinar, which is wonderful. And the Russian package will be available very soon in the next week or two. Arabic is being finalized into the fillable PDF and will be available in the next week, if I'm not mistaken. and be available online as well. So please make sure you check the WHO website. I will be putting the website in the chat so you can see. Lesha, the presentations are not yet available, but I believe that UN Water colleagues will be putting them up once we finish the webinars this evening. And so early next week, all the presentations will be available, but I believe that as of yet, they're not there yet. I think there's a few other questions coming up. So for 6B information from countries who represent official government agencies or the civil sector. So that's from George. So the information that is collected actually involves all stakeholders and within the GLAAS data collection, and I'll be talking about this a little bit more in my slide. The idea is to involve representative official government agencies as well as the civil sector. Just going through, Majida's there. Hi. Sometimes it is difficult to obtain data on the rural separate from urban areas. So what we reported normally is at the national level. How is this considered? Marina, do you want to maybe tackle that?
Sure. Yes, that's a really good question. And we do understand the difficulties in disaggregating between rural and urban in some countries. I mean, I think what we ask countries is sort of to do their best, their best possible when responding to questions. I mean, I think what we want to capture in doing this urban and rural disaggregation is, you know, in some countries, there is, in fact, a very stark difference between the situation in urban areas and in rural areas. And this is what we want to be able to capture. If what a country reports is at the national level, I mean, we try to ensure that this is reflected in the analysis that we do. But, you know, if it's very difficult to disaggregate in your country, well, you know, it is what it is. You know, we all do our best.
Thank you, Marina, and I hope that, Jida, that answers your question. There's another couple of questions, I think, before we move on. Is it possible of developing water education indicator?
Yes, so I believe this is linked to the previous question about adding a new additional indicator under target 6A. I understand that UNESCO has been actively working on developing a monitoring strategy for a water education indicator, including, I think they've done some pilots in a number of countries, and they've proposed a methodology for collecting the data. I think they are planning to collect to do a broad data collection from their member states over the next few months. In terms of whether this would be I think we need to see how this data collection develops and how the data analysis would work. So this is something that we are working with UNESCO on and keeping an eye on. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I've got a couple more questions, Marina. I've got some very interesting ones. I think there's a question in Russian, and I'm afraid maybe if the interpreters could help us either put it in the chat in English, that would be wonderful, because I'm afraid I cannot read that. Marina, did you hear that?
Oh gosh, sorry. I'm actually looking for the interpreter option in the menu, which I can't find.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No. So the question from Bubuzan was actually if we were going to present some results. And we've actually already, Marina presented some of those results. But the slides will be available on the UN Water website. But thank you very much for your question. So moving on, there's a question from Francis Caroma. Welcome, Francis. Nice to hear from you. And the question is, Marina, how do we collaborate with WASHFIT monitoring, which is an excellent question.
Yes, excellent question. So we work closely with colleagues working on WASHFIT. You know, well, I guess they're no longer strictly down the hall since we're teleworking, but but our colleagues who work on WASHFIT, we work within the same unit. We have been trying to work more closely, especially on the expenditure tracking element, to try to better capture the monitoring of WASH finance going into WASH and healthcare facilities, for example. So, I mean, we do work quite closely with them on, you know, areas of work where we overlap. We also have very much taken on board their input on the GLAAS country survey. So you will see in the survey instrument itself that there are questions on WASH in healthcare facilities that have basically come through input from our WASHFIT colleagues.
Thank you, Marina, and thank you, Francis, for your question. I have another excellent question from Daniel for you, Marina. So how confident are we that, well, that we capture most relevant finance streams to the WASH sector through GLAAS process? And what is your estimate of the share of flows that is captured? Which I think is an excellent point for follow-up with WASH accounts. Marina.
Yes, I very much agree. So in terms of finance streams that are captured through GLAAS, I think it very much depends from country to country. I think what we've seen through the different cycles of GLAAS, and you know, we've completed 5 cycles and we're now embarking on our 6th cycle. There has been a fairly dramatic increase in the quantity and the quality of the data that is provided specifically on WASH finance. I think in the beginning, there were very few countries who could provide even fairly basic information on WASH finance, and we've seen a steady increase in the number of countries that are able to report back on specific numbers on financing of the WASH sector. And also more countries that are able to provide more details. I think, you know, especially in the initial cycles of GLAAS, the lack of WASH finance data was very much a big motivation behind the development of the TRACFIN methodology in 2012, and the development of WASH accounts. So I think, you know, countries that we do have countries that are able to report back what look to be, you know, quite reliable data on WASH finance through GLAAS. I think a majority of countries, when they go through the process of trying to report back on WASH finance through GLAAS, realize that, oh, we need a better understanding of WASH finance in our country. And we've received numerous requests from countries to develop WASH accounts through this means. I think a country that develops WASH accounts actually does have a very good grasp of the funds coming into the WASH sector in their country and how those funds are being spent and by whom. So it's difficult to give like a global estimate of the share of flows that are captured through GLAAS, because I think we do more of an assessment country by country in terms of the availability and reliability of the data that are being reported. I think for countries that have developed WASH accounts, that, you know, we have a lot more confidence that for that country, the WASH financial flows are being, you know, well captured and monitored. But at least offhand, it's difficult to provide an overall estimate of what share of the flows that we're capturing globally.
Thank you very much, Marina, and thank you, Daniel, for your question. Excellent. So I think I'll just maybe read out, Marina, there's I think 3 other questions, and then I think after that we should move on. We can either decide to answer in the chat, or maybe if you want to raise any out loud. But Lisha says it would be great if we can convince national offices to sign off use citizen data. My question is on disaggregation, on male, female, but also on rural, suburban. Another question is from Francis. What are the baselines used to differentiate between rural and urban communities? And Lisha is also suggesting, could we use one of the indicators already there under SDG 4 on education? And lastly, I think we've got 2 more. Is there a way to link the national finance streams to the progress of achieving targets SDG 6, particularly 6.1 and 6.2? And Daniel has a question about Burundi engaging on WASH accounts. We can certainly, Daniel, answer that in the chat, but that would be absolutely wonderful if the government of Burundi would be interested in leading WASH accounts, and we will definitely get back to you on that. Marina, do you want to tackle any of those questions, or would you like to tackle them in the chat while I go through the next slides, as you wish?
Maybe just to address those that can be addressed fairly quickly. I guess in terms of differentiating between rural and urban communities, we very much rely on national definition of urban and rural. So there is not like a standardized definition that is applied across all countries, but it's based on the national definition. In terms of SDG 4 on education, I think the movement and the initiative that UNESCO is leading on the water education indicator is, I think the motivation was to really focus on water education. So I mean, I guess an argument could be made for, you know, looking to see whether it fits under other SDGs, but I think certainly UNESCO feels strongly that it belongs under SDG 6. And the question that I'm seeing in the chat about linking national finance streams to the progress of achieving targets under SDG 6, particularly 6.1 and 6.2. That's a really interesting question, and that's exactly the type of analysis that we're trying to develop and promote through the WASH accounts as well.
Great, Marina, thank you very much. I think we should probably move on in the interest of time. So thank you to all of you for your questions, and we are happy to follow up after this webinar. This is just the start of the conversation. But what I'd like to do right now is maybe take you through a little bit the data collection processes and the key steps that we use and how at country level this is organized. But first of all, this is also going to answer the question about the launch of the GLAAS survey in the different regions. And I'm really glad that we've got, the WHO regional advice from Europe, but also our colleagues from the Eastern Mediterranean region with us, Mohammed and Dennis. So thank you for being here, because they are instrumental in helping to coordinate in the regions. So this is just to give you, next slide please, Marina, a bit of an idea of the timeline. So we have just been in the process and launched the PDF surveying package in English at the end of August, and the package itself is going to be online by the end of this month in 6 languages, as I was mentioning earlier on. A number of regional GLAAS trainings are going to take place. There is one next week in the Eastern Mediterranean region. There will be one in the African region for all the nominated GLAAS focal points from the governments at the first week of October. And then data collection will be started. The deadline for data collection and to submit the data back is the 1st of April 2022, as I mentioned, and the report launch will be towards the end of next year. And there'll be a period between the data submission time in April and between June, where we will be going back and forth, dealing with data quality issues, and before the preparation of the report. Next slide, please, Marina. So maybe just to let you know what's new in this new GLAAS survey and what updates have been done since the last survey, particularly for those of you that are very familiar with the survey content. In view of the current pandemic that we've all been going through over the last years, we've tried to be more comprehensive on the questions regarding hand hygiene. And it really goes now more specifically into hand hygiene rather than previously around hand hygiene promotion. There's also some new questions on WASH in COVID-19 preparedness and response plans. We've also revised section C, which is on human resources, and it's a little bit more, it has been extended and goes into a little bit more depth. And as in the past cycle, GLAAS cycle, the format is a fillable PDF. Along with the survey and the regional trainings I've just mentioned, there is also a survey guidance document that really helps to answer any questions or queries, or if there's any sort of definitions that really need to be sort of defined clearly. I'm also pleased to let you know that following popular feedback from countries in the last cycle, we are testing and pilot testing a new platform, eGLAAS, so that we can test this platform, which is an online version for data collection, which will be available in English and in Spanish a bit later in the year. And that is being coordinated by the WHO regional office colleagues. And we are hoping to have maybe 10 countries that would be willing to submit their data online, so we can test this new platform, so that we eventually can move from using a fillable PDF to an online data collection. But for further information, and this is also valid for any other questions you may have, please don't hesitate to contact us at GLAAS with 2 A's at who.int. So please take note of that email for any communications, and if you want to get in touch with our GLAAS and WASH accounts team at WHO. Next slide, please, Marina. So just to introduce the GLAAS process, and these are actually slides that we use for our trainings, but I take the opportunity because some of you are familiar with this, will be participating in the trainings, and some of you I'm hoping might also be helping to present some of these slides in certain regions. But there are essentially 7 key steps in the GLAAS process. Next slide, Marina, please. And the first step has actually been already ongoing since June in the various regions. And it's really to exchange between the WHO country and regional office with partners, including UNICEF, and with government representative and key stakeholders. And that's really to assess interest. The participation in GLAAS is voluntary. And what happens is that the WHO country offices writes to the government, and then a nomination for a GLAAS focal point at the government level is sent back, and interest and confirmation of the participation. Next slide, please. Once the decision by the government has been taken to participate in the GLAAS initiative, a national focal point person is identified that preferably is from within a lead ministry or department, and to be the main coordinator, facilitator of GLAAS. And I can see, actually, I'm really pleased that on this webinar today, we've got a few of our GLAAS focal points, which is wonderful, and a warm welcome and thank you to you and others. And then there's a need to identify resources and to outline a brief work plan. And that has already been done in many countries. And although we don't have, we only have some seed funding to help countries organize a meeting, if possible, if that's in person, to hire a national consultant to help the government focal point to organize the data collection. Next slide, please. So I think one of the critical, and this comes back to some of the questions that have been going on in the chat, but it's really to identify the key stakeholders. I mean, I mentioned this before, we all know the WASH sector is very fragmented, involves the Ministry of Health, the line ministries, Ministry of Finance, National Bureau of Statistics. So it's really to try and map which ministries have and are involved in the WASH sector, and to be able to identify those people that can support the process of filling out the GLAAS survey. And I think that this is also very important, just coming back down towards the end of the list is not only the various ministries, the regulators, but also the in-country development partners and the donors, and involving all the, the NGOs that are involved in WASH, but also the private sector. And there's also the other focal points that, whether they're at national, regional, global monitoring initiatives, such as the SDG 6 focal point, making sure that the GLAAS focal point knows who the SDG 6 focal point is, the SWA focal point. Some of the times, these people are actually only one person, and the same person having that multiple role, but also making sure to involve the National Bureau of Statistics, and as well as the SDG reporting focal point, which of course can also be different from the SDG 6 focal point. Next slide, please. And then the next step is really to gather the relevant documents and policies, and to be able to have the most up-to-date information, and to start preparing for the GLAAS data collection, and organizing an inception meeting, sorry. This is a very important step because it's also about making sure that everybody's aware, coming around the table to discuss and to be clear about what the GLAAS data collection is about, and to really sort of assign roles and responsibility. Next slide, please. And then there's the data collection phase. And it's, as I said, the nominated national focal point that takes on that role of coordinating responses to the GLAAS survey from the various stakeholders. And this can take different forms and formats in different countries. It can be ongoing meetings, it can be sort of small group meetings with different leads for different, whether it be sanitation or to tackle healthcare facilities, and these different focal points are responsible for those particular questions in the survey. And then it can be organized in different ways, in different formats in different countries. There's no one way to go about it. It really is depending on the processes in countries, the the already existing processes that exist for assembling WASH colleagues. Next slide, please. I mean, one of the difficulties of filling out the GLAAS survey is, of course, the scope of the questions, going from financial questions to human resource questions, to governance, to monitoring. So, of course, there's a number of stakeholders that will have been likely involved in completing the survey. So we always recommend and suggest that a final workshop is held to make sure everybody's sort of on the same page and agreeing. And even if it's not agreement, it's an opportunity to exchange and to review together and to come to some consensus and then to validate the results. And then the next step is for the government to sign off on the results before submission. Next slide, please. And of course, the submission, as I mentioned earlier on, are to be submitted through the WHO country regional offices and copied to GLAAS, the email that we can be reached at by the 1st of April 2022. Depending on the region, that deadline has been agreed and defined differently. What needs to be submitted is the actual survey form with the results in, the country feedback form, and we've revised this to ask specifically about questions about data use, because the idea is really to be able to integrate this data collection, the information that's collected, into decisions, into how actually it can be used and be useful, because we really mean to have this information useful for countries in decision making. And the consent form. Next slide, please. There will be, as I said, a period where our team will be going back and forth with our colleagues at the regional offices and country offices to review the surveys and follow up with the focal points with any additional questions, if there's maybe a typo, you know, a lack of currency, or maybe an extra zero has been put in. So we are pretty thorough in going back and forth. And in this particular new cycle, previously we produced country highlights. In this cycle, these will the country highlights, which are basically GLAAS country profiles, which summarize more than 70% of the data that has been submitted through the survey, will be generated through the GLAAS data portal that Marina is going to be mentioning shortly and talking to you about. And this will be part of the quality assurance processes. So we are trying to move with our time with this new data portal, and we hope that the production of the GLAAS profile highlight will be a lot quicker than it has been in the past. Next slide, please. Just to finish off, and we're coming towards the end here, but I think we've mentioned this, we hope to be able to launch the next GLAAS report towards the end of next year, and it will be available on the GLAAS website. It will also be published through the data portal, and then, as I've just said, users can generate customized country highlights, which I think will be extremely useful and more useful, so that these elements can be integrated in your national reports and other need presentations for high level. And also the GLAAS data sets can be downloaded. Given the increased emphasis on country use of data from the GLAAS process, WHO, we may be following up on information provided by countries in the feedback forms. So we're really keen to get your feedback on data use and to see how we can improve this in the future. And with that, I'm actually going to pass over to Marina to say a few words about the GLAAS data portal that's being launched in the next few days, and that we're really excited about, and we will be sharing with UN Water, and of course the links, and it will be on our website, and we'll be happy to share that with you. So Marina, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. As Fiona mentioned, this is a really exciting development for us that we've been working on for the past several months. I think up until now, if you're familiar with or have looked for GLAAS data in the past, to be able to access the full data set, we've been generally making available a very large Excel file posted to our website. which has not been very, not necessarily very accessible or interactive. So through the data portal, what we aim to do is to allow users to interactively explore and download data sets by topic area. There's also functionality to visualize key indicators and also to search for GLAAS in national documents, such as national WASH policies and plans that countries submit to us as part of their survey submission. As Fiona mentioned, a really exciting feature of the data portal that we are looking forward to, this part is currently actually in development, is the generation of the GLAAS country highlights. So I think countries in the past have found the country highlights quite useful as a document to use within their country for, meetings that they may have to, provide a good overview of the WASH systems situation in their country. We hope to be able to provide this service, but through the data portal and with some elements of interactivity so that it can be customized to a certain extent to the user's needs, and then exported to PDF if needed for whatever purposes. We also expect that this automated generation of GLAAS country highlights will very much streamline the quality assurance process, in the sense that I think up until now, we've had interactions with regional offices and countries multiple times for the quality assurance, notably first when the survey is submitted, and then sometimes when the report is being prepared, and then again when we generate the country highlights. And we hope to streamline this so that we're trying to contain all of these interactions on quality assurance into one, so that the country highlights can actually be generated almost as soon as the survey data are submitted. So we're hoping that by shortening the time between when the survey is submitted and when the country highlights are generated, it will be even more useful to users in country as well as to partners. So as Fiona mentioned, we are days away from launching the phase 1 version of the data portal. It will not have all of the features, but it will include data from the past 3 GLAAS cycles, from 2013-14, from 2016-17, and 2018-19. And it will include the features to be able to explore and download data, as well as to visualize key indicators. We are progressively improving and adding data over time. So we're currently working on including the data from the external support agency surveys, as well as the WASH accounts data. So please, keep an eye open over the next few months as we add data and new features to the data portal. And we plan to have the full portal available with all of the features to be launched before the end of this year. So probably around December time, early December time is the goal. So hopefully you'll get a chance to see the data portal, at least the initial version, over in the next few days. And then we hope that you'll come back repeatedly and see new data and features over time. So thank you.
And with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. WHO, UN Water, Marina and I from the GLAAS and WASH accounts team at WHO headquarters. And if there are no other questions, I think that we can probably close a little early. Marina and I are happy to stay online if anybody wants to have an exchange for a few minutes. But I don't see any additional questions or any hands up but maybe we'll give you the opportunity to type. But I don't see anybody typing. Oh, Lesha, let me try to unmute you. Can you hear us? No, not yet. Can you hear? Yes.
We can hear you. I'm not sure you can hear me.
We can hear you, Lesha. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Well, first of all, people, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. I hope the outstanding questions get some attention in the coming weeks. I know we're all extremely busy, but there were two things I wanted to come back to. One is the disaggregated data. I think it's really important to see how we can do that better. And also make sure that even if we get the data, they're also reported on, because that's part of the problem every time. That we do know that some of these data are available, but that the way that the reporting is done, we sort of lose those data. So in the second one, Marina was mentioning that they would really like to encourage non-state actors to also fill in the surveys, but there is a small problem. So how do we connect those civil society organizations and NGOs and local governments, for that matter, to the survey, that they know it's even going on? And secondly, most of these CSOs don't have a connection with their National Statistical Office. So how do we tackle that? And I think, you know, looking at the lack of data that we all want to overcome, that this is a very important issue. So maybe we can discuss this further or find a way to do it. My network is happy to support you on that, because I'm really shocked about the fact that only 14 out of the 109 countries reported there is real participation in this. So that means we have a lot of work cut out for us, I think. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lesha. And we really appreciate your questions in this webinar. And I think you're right. How do we tackle this? I think we collectively really, I mean, from our side, we need to, through the government, encourage wide participation, but we also need your networks to help us. We have also been working with SWA and the CSO arm of SWA to reach out and to ensure and try and encourage CSO participation even more. I think we're making progress, but as you said, we're not there yet. And I think we've still got a lot of work to do on this, to really encourage and make those connections that often, you know, even the connections between the CSOs and the National Bureau of Statistics. And I think we're, as Marina said, we're in our sixth cycle now. I think we've made a lot of progress, but not yet enough. And we still have to work on this particularly. Marina, do you want to add?
Yeah, just very briefly. Thank you again, Lesha, for your questions. And I do agree that it's not only collecting the disaggregated data in the survey, but it's also sort of like the analysis and communication of the results. So, I mean, to, you know, sort of the headline indicator and the reporting that we do to UNSD doesn't take into account any of the disaggregations, even the ones that we do collect. You know, so in addition to sort of like the headline policies defined in law or policy and the level of participation, we do also have, for this particular question, we do also ask about women's participation and whether the procedures specifically mention women's participation. And we do find some, you know, opportunities to report this data. For example, this data were featured in this year's gender snapshot But it's not, it's not necessarily something that is systematically reported on a regular basis. And similarly, I do have the survey open in front of me now, and we do have urban and rural disaggregation for the population coverage for access to participation opportunities. But again, in terms of reporting this data, it's not always straightforward. And generally we're only reporting a part of the data, or just like the headline numbers. So we're also really happy to provide this data to others who are interested, who might be interested in doing further analyses or further promotion of the results. That would be very welcome. And we're also hoping that the data are going to be a lot more accessible to people through the data portal as well. So hopefully that helps. Thanks.
Thanks, Leshan. Thanks, Marina. We have a colleague, Nagnoma from Kenya, I believe, says, I believe that Lesha's right, and sometimes we need other networks to assist and reach out at the data is relevant for the data to be relevant for all parties. And I think that's really quite right. And we urge and encourage you all to get, and this is exactly why we're spreading the word and raising awareness about this new GLAAS data collection, is for you all to be involved. Nagnoma was asking, I did not log in on time, but wondering if Kenya is part of the 14 that Lesha mentioned, and I was quickly picking up the GLAAS report to try and check, but I actually didn't manage to check in time, but I'm sure Marina is going to check on that. But I just like to say maybe a few words before we close the meeting, because I think this is the opportunity of having this webinar, and I'd really like to thank our colleagues at UN Water for providing the platform and for organizing and reaching out to all of you to allow us to really share the information about the monitoring and reporting for SDG 6, 6A and B. It is challenging, and I think we can all appreciate that, and the more we work all together and coordinate and use our networks, and this is why we were keen to share with you how the SDG monitoring and reporting fits in to the GLAAS initiative, as well as the WASH accounts initiative and work, so that we can continue improving. And we really appreciate the questions that have been raised in the chat, that have been raised in plenary, and I can assure you that we are taking these all on board, and we really appreciate this opportunity today to be together and to be able to share this information so that we can raise awareness and make more noise and get more networks involved, particularly as we launch this new GLAAS data collection. And this is the time, this is the opportunity. And again, I'll mention, don't hesitate, any of you, to get in touch with us through the glaas@who.int email that I'll re-put in the chat. Also to use those slides, we'll be sharing, and of course those slides, through the UN Water website. And with that, I'd like to maybe pass back to Marina, because she seems like she's found the answer of whether Kenya was part of the 14. I can see it on her face. And maybe Marina, if you want to say a few words, and then I think we'll close the meeting. Thank you, Marina. And thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Fiona. You read my mind. So in fact, I was able to find the response on the test site of the GLAAS data portal, just a demonstration of how useful we're hoping the GLAAS data portal will be once it launches to the public in the next few days. So indeed, Kenya is one of the countries that reported a high level of participation in the last cycle. And as Fiona said, we just want to thank you all so much for joining the webinar today. It's been really great interacting with you on these targets and on, updating you on the GLAAS and the GLAAS upcoming data collection cycle. So a huge thank you to all of you.
And the interpreters.
And the interpreters. Yes, thank you to the interpreters for the hard work that you've done today. Thank you all for joining, for listening, for your questions. I hope that we can continue discussions outside of this webinar And if you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I think we're very excited about the new GLAAS cycle and new interesting analyses that we can do, and potentially also show through the GLAAS data portal. So thank you to everyone for joining, and we hope to see you again in some shape or form. Take care and see you again sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.